Welcome to Become an Idol. This is episode 7, Scenario Design Tips with Anna Sabramowicz. I'm Dr. Robin Sargent, owner of Idol Courses, and this is the place where newbies come to learn and veterans share their knowledge. In this episode, I'll be chatting with Anna Sabramowicz about her expertise in scenario design. She lays out how to craft scenarios and when to use them in your courses. You'll also learn how Anna Sabramowicz became an idol without a degree or experience. I have here with me today Anna Sabramowicz, and if you have been around or digging into instructional design for any amount of time, you've probably come across her profile. You've seen her on LinkedIn. She's done like all the guest speaking for all the different instructional design blogs and video casts and podcasts. She has her own podcast, eLearning Scenario Design, and she is just a rock star in our field. And so who better to come and talk to us about becoming an idol than Anna Sabramowicz. She's been doing this for 15 years. She's been self-employed for the last 8 years, and she even has her own company called eLearner Engage. So Anna, go ahead and introduce yourself a little more properly than I just did.
Oh my gosh, Robin, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome. Plus, I love your energy. Great. I love that intro, man. That's, I'm like, that's me. Get all proud.
Totally you.
You know what? I'm just really excited to be here because I know you have a big mission and a vision, and you're really out there helping the new instructional designers just get a good foothold on this industry. So hopefully I can share some hard-earned lessons with them today, and talk about maybe a little bit about, scenarios and what I do, what they are, and maybe this is a skill set that they want to dig more deeply into. But definitely, I would love to share some of my lessons that I've had over the past, long time that I've been working in not only just, the corporate sector, but also in academia, and also as a person who's worked from home. So that whole concept of, remote work, creating relationships with people long distance. How do you do that? All those things. So if whatever you want to discuss, I am here. So much.
Well, I definitely want to pick your brain about scenario design. I think that, even especially like for somebody to come into instructional design as a beginner, and to start in that kind of place would be a huge advantage.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think the thing is, and it's funny. I just thought about this. Like when you get into this world, and I don't know if you're can resonate with this, but you get into this world and you do it because you love to learn, and sometimes that kind of bites us a little bit in the butt because we think, hey, I'll just learn everything, and you end up doing that. You end up becoming a master of like 24 different things, and then what happens is the companies that we work at sometimes expect us to be good at 24 different things, right? You got to be Photoshop savvy, you got to be do graphic design, all these things. So what happens is you end up kind of fragmented. So for me, digging deep into this after I had been the kind of person who was like fragmented was good because I found out where I really enjoyed adding value. And I think a lot of times you have to kind of go through the fragmentation phase of learning a whole bunch of different things to really see where you shine, and then just digging deep on that. So that's how I got into scenario design, basically, is just figuring out this is where I can really add the value. And that's what kind of got me excited to work on projects. So if you can find out what that little nugget is, that's amazing.
Well, I hate to bring it to this example, but that kind of reminds me of my lunch today.
Really?
I was at the Indian buffet, and you got to try a little bit of everything, and like the first plate, and then you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go back for all like the tiki masala or whatever. But I'm gonna focus the rest of
I
my lunch
seriously love
on
that
that.
analogy. I love it. You know, it's totally true. It's actually that's a great. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that because it's true. You don't know what you like, right? You don't know what resonates with you, and especially like Indian food, man. There's so much variety, right? So yeah, you got, and some things look really like they're not going to burn your mouth.
Yeah.
Very good analogy. I love it.
Okay, so before we get into like, the gold nuggets of your wisdom, which is scenario design, you have to tell everyone like, how did you actually get into instructional design? Because people's journey to becoming an idol is always fascinates me.
Well, I was going to be a teacher in high school, and I was going to be, what is it? A chemistry English teacher. That's even possible. But
Yeah.
my loans got declined for the last year, and I had to like quit university and go to a call center. Go to a call center and get a lowly call center job. Which I then considered a total failure in my life because I was raised to believe that I'm an immigrant. I'm a little immigrant kid from Poland. So basically, we were raised that if you went to university, that means you made it, you succeeded, right? And I didn't, and so I felt like I had failed my mom for a very long time. But I'm over that now. Because what happened at this call center, what was amazing is that I still was able to kind of pursue this whole idea of learning. And that's when I really got into the idea of adult education. Like that really resonated with me. And then what's kind of cool in the company that I got to work with, they were actually one of Canada's top 100 companies. And a part of that is that they they invested so heavily into their staff and into new technologies and into personal development. And so I just thrived there. I basically got into the world of virtual classrooms, e-learning, and all those other things. They were just kind of at the cusp, and these guys were investing in it. And it was awesome because I got in and I just basically took off from there. So, so the next decade I spent just getting good at that, and it really resonated with me. I never went back to university to finish my education degree because I didn't want to, because this was just the trajectory that, it was still aligned with teaching, but it was almost even more satisfying. So then. But I was still always like looking for more. I don't know if any of you listening have this thing where you're searching for meaning through your work. And for us, I think it's actually almost harder now in the digital world because you don't get to feel the product. You don't create a chair or something and touch it and you're like, you know what I mean? Like, you just don't make these things. So it's harder to get that feeling. I don't know if you know what I mean.
Oh, me? Yes, of course. Although I do like looking at my digital products over and over.
For sure. That's so pretty, right? So I'm going through, and I have jobs in corporate, I have jobs in academia, and I'm searching for something because I'm trying to find my space where I fit. And it's kind of cool. When I started working for myself, I basically moved because I wanted to get away from the terrible winters of Manitoba. If you've ever been to Manitoba in the winter, you will never come back. But what happened is then I started, there was a competition on with one of the software companies. Some of you may be familiar with it, Articulate. And they were just launching their new software storyline. And I got to be a part of the beta group. And me and my partner, Ryan, we thought, why don't we, because we'd been doing some projects for our past clients and things like that, but we were still new in that business, so we were kind of doing what people told us to do. Whatever came our way, we were like, yeah, it's money. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So then we were like, this is our opportunity. We can actually make a project go, and it'll be our baby. It'll be the way we want it. It'll be the content we want. It'll be the feedback, the engagement we want. Let's do it. So we did. We launched it. It was called Broken Coworker. Seriously, when I launched it, a lot of people get back to me now and they're like, I actually had to look at your profile picture and the picture of the person in the e-learning, and I realized that's you. acting in all those videos wearing a blonde wig. And I was like, yes. And it was, and I felt like a total, like, I thought when we sent that over for our submission, there was a competition, right? To win a Guru Award and also a sweet iPad. But one of the things I was thinking was, I am going to make a total fool of myself because this is so out there, like just goofy. And I thought it was a little too provocative. And then I'm like, yeah, and that's me in a video in a blonde wig acting like a really notorious bully, right? And then, so we sent it off and I was just like, wanted to throw up in my mouth, basically. I was like, I don't know if we can do this. And it came back. People loved it. People loved it. But this is the cool thing. People loved it. Cool thing and the sad thing. People loved it. We won the Guru Award. It was awesome. And then, but then I didn't believe in it. I didn't think it could be that easy to create engaging things through scenarios. I thought you needed something else. So for a couple of years, I kept on searching for more complicated ways to engage. And actually, just like several years ago, I just went back to it and it just hit me in the face. I said, was that a good pattern? Was that a good way to engage people? Scenarios? It can't be that easy. And then I just figured out that I actually could just do that and help people do that, because people aren't good at doing that, scenarios, and just focus on becoming basically a force multiplier. So instead of trying to do one-off projects and trying to change the world a little bit at a time, I can now help people in companies do their own force multiplier stuff and become their own scenario experts in their own right, and apply this and use it as a part of their toolkit so that they can just pull it off the shelf whenever they want to and just say, hey, this is now what we're using and here's a framework and it works and there's no need to reinvent the wheel.
So is this Broken Coworker project, you won the award, right? I'm guessing.
Yes.
Is it still online? Like, can I find a link for it for our show notes?
Oh yeah. I want people like, please, I look so good and blonde.
I want to see this.
It is fun. And you know what's cool? One of the things I love is when you put something together, you said you love looking at your digital stuff. I like when you put together a project and you go through it and you're like, yeah, I still like it. That's how Broken Coworker is for me. I'm like, I still go through it and I'm like, yeah, it's still fun. I love it. So I get emails and comments about it to this day because it is live. I want it to be it's got a really good message. Really about bullying and building confidence. And it's funny because people will email me and they'll say things like these are the comments I get. I actually had a boss like that. I wish I would have seen your this module because I think it would have helped me deal with that situation better. And I was like, whoa, right? Like shivers, gives me shivers. And I'm like, I just put this out. It's based on, mine and Ryan's kind of like office antics that and I've definitely been through some of those kinds of situations, but that's cool when you can get people to go through something that you've built and you didn't even have to force them. It wasn't a part of a compliance request. It's just because they want to. So that's awesome.
So we have to back up just a little bit. So you said you were like in a call center.
Yeah.
And then they gave you training. So like, did you kind of move from the call center into the training department or how did that happen? Well,
basically what I did is I just took on more responsibility while I was there. So I started becoming the go-to person for all the, not all the, but half of the call center staff, right? And then what happened is when the position came up, I already had to take in some education courses, but also then I took my adult learning certification through so I did go back to university, but it wasn't like officially back to university. I just did my adult learning certification and then I moved up through to the trainer. That's where actually I learned that scenarios really are kick butt in creating like value for people, because in the training, we heavily relied on role plays and scenarios. And it was just awesome. That's when we started seeing gains. So yeah, then I moved into training and then I got into the design of training. So I became the coordinator of designing the learning and playing with the software and launching those things. So that's kind of the path. And then from there, it's all history.
And then you just like said, oh, I just do this on my own.
Well, no, that was, I did that for, well, it's going to be 8 years now that I'm doing this. So the prior to the other 7 years, I've really just been working in corporate and academia. Like I worked at insurance, finance, technical colleges. So it's been a wild ride. And in the meantime, I've also been a part of other organizations for long-term projects. So it kind of feels like, yeah.
Okay, because I just want, because I always want to like point that out to people who are interested in this, because like you really can just, if you are already in a position where they have a training department, you can like slide your way in there.
Heck yeah. I think that's one of the, to me, that's the easiest way to do it, in fact, because let's be real. People hire those who they trust, they know, they like, and people who understand their business, right? So if you already have a connection and you already enjoy being there, it's a great company, stay, just progress through that place. It's wonderful.
It's wonderful. And then once you get your title instructional designer, you can go anywhere.
Yeah. Well, you can, or you can just
stay there
and lead your own team, like make a change. It's funny because people are always like, oh, you can just, it's true though. Like if it's funny because I think a lot of people wait on like, they'll wait on somebody to recognize them and be like, oh, next year I'll get my raise. The best way to get a raise is to get a new job.
That's what I say. I completely agree.
And I agree with you because that's how I did it. You know, how else can you get a 10K raise in a year? You go to a new job.
I did it every year almost.
Exactly. Yeah, right? Like seriously, you can totally do that. It's been done. If anybody listening to this, Robin and I are proof.
Yeah, and it's not bad to have on your resume either, like, oh, they're a job hopper. That's not a thing, especially in instructional design, because there's so many like contract jobs. That's just what people do now.
Yeah, it is. So. And the other thing is like, it's funny because there's definitely, you definitely got to be careful, because if you're job hopping every 6 months, that might say something about you, right?
Sure.
But you don't have to list everything on your resume. Just list the stuff that's relevant to this new position, right? I'm not going to go all the way back and list my high school jobs. You're going to list the things that are going to give somebody an indication that I'm qualified for this job. Look at this experience I've had, or the wins I've had, right? So yeah, I totally look at it that way. So.
Also, another excellent point. That's absolutely how you should write your resume anyway.
Yeah.
So, okay, so now let's get into scenario design, because, you know,
let's do it.
We can't let you go without you talking to us about scenario design.
You are too kind.
So, I mean, I'm sure that like most people have like an idea of what this means. Like, oh, okay, so you are setting up an example scenario that they can apply to, you know, on the job or in their real life. But like for you, like, how do you define scenario design? Like, what's that mean?
Great question. And you're right. Like, it's exactly what you said. There's this situation that I'm setting up, right? And the situation is in the context of somebody doing something for real, right? Like in their job, it's something that they potentially could like read and be like, oh yeah, totally. I can see myself doing that. That's totally what I do. But I think where a lot of people get all messed up with scenarios, like when they hear, they're like, oh, you do scenarios. They think that scenarios are the same as case studies. And there's a difference. So let's say what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put you in the context of your work. So I'm giving you a situation or a place where you have to make a decision. And the beauty of scenarios is that I don't just present you with options on how to solve that situation, how to make that decision. What are you going to do? But the big powerful thing is that I don't tell you if you did it wrong or right, or if you handled it the right way. I show you what happens as a result of your decision. I show you. That's the powerful part. I don't tell you, I show you. And when I show you through the consequences, hopefully what happens is you get one of those like awesome aha moments where you're like, oh, that didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. Oh my God, that
I just cut
sucks.
the doctor's thumb off.
Yeah. And the thing is, you don't even need to say if that's good or bad, because that's so bad. You're just like, my God, right? But that's how we learn. And what's cool is like you get to work with people who are in the field, you pull this info from them, and then you get to like get somebody to practice making cutting thumbs off in a safe place, right? Nobody gets hurt. And also some people might want to try different approaches to hurting somebody else. So what happens is you can practice as many times until you get it. What's really cool too is a lot of people, like even with the Broken Coworker, they'll go through and experience the bad paths, even though they are emotionally intelligent enough to know that they're not the best paths, because they just want to see what happens. How bad can it get? And it's a great way to experience consequences without, like I said, nobody getting hurt, nothing's being burnt, or nothing bad is happening, but you're getting the aha moments. And then later, if needed, you can actually get some feedback and additional resources, which I always suggest, to learn more if you all of a sudden realized you're not as good at making this kind of decision or handling this kind of situations as you thought you were. So that's a scenario.
And also, you made me remember that you said like they go back through and like take the different paths.
Mm-hmm.
That's also more time on task in that same learning environment. So they're not just getting that information once all the way through, especially if they're like going back and doing it again. And as we know, time on task, especially in like when you're learning things, always increases its effectiveness. So
absolutely. And what's cool is that if you do this well, if you're okay with focusing yourself enough to keep this really small and agile, you can actually continue redeploying this to your people in the learning environment. Say, a month from now, I'm going to show them the scenario again. You actually, I'm sure you know the statistics. People need to see something 7 times before they actually are like, oh, I remember this now. Like you'll show something to somebody a month from now and they'll be like, what? It's like, didn't you just go through this training? So it's actually good for them to see it over and over again. And guess what? You can do that with scenarios quickly. Just see, hey, are you making better decisions now? Or here's a decision. I wonder if you remember how you handled it last time. And maybe now that you are on the job, you're going to handle it a little bit differently. So it's a great way to not only create something that's time on task, your initial training, but also as a follow-up strategy for learners to get more comfortable with making these decisions. So yeah, it's fun.
So now, okay, so we know like the basic principles of scenario design, and now I'm immediately thinking about like branching and showing people these consequences. Like, how many levels of consequences do you try to include? I mean, do you try to put in like, do you have like a ratio or a rubric or whatever? It's like, oh, I got to put at least like all the consequences or like half of them, or how do you figure that out?
Great question. That's a great question. So one of my idols in scenario design who I learned from is Kathy Moore. And Kathy Moore started, she said 7 branches and deep, right? That's max that you go. And I agree with her. And I also think that you can go even less branchy than that, because it really depends on what you're trying to achieve with your scenario. So there are some scenarios and some situations where a decision that you make up front is really critical to the amount, to let's say the outcome three steps down. Like, let's say let's say for a call center, you call in, and if somebody doesn't get verified in the very beginning that they actually are the person who they say they are, then it doesn't matter what you do, like how great the rest of the call goes. You basically failed that call because you let somebody who's not a card holder give them information that is that they shouldn't be privy to, right? So in that scenario, the first two steps can affect the outcome of the rest of the situation. So there you need branches. But there are certain other scenarios where the individual decisions don't necessarily impact each other. So you don't need to create complicated branches. The branch might be one or two. Now, here's the other thing about consequences that's pretty important. So when I run my workshops, and the best ones are when I run them live, because those are the most fun, by the way, because you get energy from the room. That's one of the things you kind of miss when you're doing like online stuff. You don't get energy from the room the same way. But anyways, I detract. So what happened is this one lady, she was like, listen, Anna, I like this scenario thing, but what if a learner comes back to you, or she was basically talking about herself. She said, I wouldn't think that. Those are not my options. So how come, you only have two consequences there, or two decisions there, but I would think of something else. And if I have 50 people, then probably there could be 50 things that they're thinking of doing, and therefore the consequence would be varied 50 times, right? And I'm like, that's true. But the problem, or not the problem, the opportunity is that we're not creating real life. What we're doing is we're creating a magical world where we're focusing on like the top 2 or top 3 issues that people mess up on when faced with a specific decision. So I'm going to focus my options around those things. And it's kind of crazy because when you really evaluate that with an expert, usually the outcomes, the consequences, it ends up being a very small amount of things, success or failure. Do you know what I mean? So your consequences really don't need to be as complicated as you think, because our world's not infinite. In fact, it's just going to be like you sold the house or you didn't. The customer bought the shirt or they didn't buy. You successfully completed the surgery or you didn't, right? So there's details you can add around that. But as far as like how branchy you need to get that, you just need to focus on where people mess up your most expensive mistakes. And that's what your scenarios are focused around. And the rest you do in live sessions, discussions. In fact, what I really love is when you use a scenario that's self-paced online to prompt a live session, a live discussion with a large group, because now everybody's kind of gone through the same experience, which you don't always have when you have people in a room. You don't know where they're all coming from. So now all of a sudden everybody has a common experience, they've made a decision, and now they're coming into this room with their own ideas about how that should have been solved. Now that's a great conversation starter.
Yes, that would be a great conversation starter. Have you seen, okay, this is a little on the other side. Have you seen the You versus Wild and those other scenario shows that they're doing on Netflix? Have you seen any of those?
I've only seen the ads for them, and then I canceled Netflix.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So give me the premise.
Okay. Well, I love it because it's a show that like me and my older sons can watch, and it's called You versus Wild.
Yeah.
And it's Bear Grylls. And he is going into the wild, and he is like, he's about to jump out of the helicopter, and he has like either like a grappling hook or a parachute or something. And then we get to pick like which one he like jumps out of the plane with. And awesome. I mean, that was a bad example.
No, I love it.
Well, the fun ones are like when he's like out in the wilderness and he's hungry, and he's like, I could pick off all these little like twigs and eat the tiny little berry, but I'd have to get like 100 twigs to get full, or I could eat this one grub. And then of course like me and the boys are like, eat the grub. And then what it reminds me of is that it's just so compelling that it's like you don't even realize that you're learning about survival, and like, and like the whole thing that you start to see a pattern emerge is like, take the least amount of risk whenever you're making these like survival decisions. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like what happens in scenario design is like, if it's good and compelling and it's like kind of fun, then you don't even realize like what you're learning. You're just like in it,
Yeah, totally.
Just like eat the grub.
And what's amazing too is there's so many nuggets in that. I'm going to have to now buy a Netflix subscription again just so I can watch this show. But this is what's cool. The whole show sounds like it's driven by decisions, which is awesome. No complicated UI or anything, user interface. It's like, do this or do that, right?
Right.
But the decisions are what driving it, and it's compelling. That's interesting. And also, you're not thinking, okay, but then he could also eat some dirt and he could go and, like, you're not thinking of all the other things. In the moment, it's these two powerful decisions. Which one, right? So I love that. That's phenomenal. Actually, now that you mentioned Netflix, there is a scenario, like a full-on scenario, interactive scenario episode on there. I don't know, you maybe have seen it. You could watch it with your kids. It's called Bandersnatch.
Yeah, that's from Black Mirror. I did watch that one.
Yeah.
I like You versus Wild more.
Yeah, you know what? I totally agree. There's a reason that one didn't, for me, it didn't resonate. Like, although the idea of decisions and you being in charge of that story, having autonomy is kind of, I think, the way they're going. Like, this is what they're going to start investing at, you being a part of the movie. But for me, the reason it didn't do so well is because the story wasn't compelling. So I didn't resonate with the main character at all, right?
I completely agree, because in that one, like, if you don't kill your father, who's done nothing wrong to you, then like,
spoiler alert,
you have to start back at the beginning, and it's just like, I would never. I'm not going to kill the father.
Yeah, I know, right? So it's like moral questions. But what I thought it was kind of funny, because when you actually, there's so many nerds deconstructing it on the back end as far as, how it really worked. But that one was felt complicated, but really when you look at it on the back end, it's very minimal branching and always two decisions. And it's how many times do we try and overcomplicate things by adding whiz bang stuff and click and reveals and all this stuff, when really it's like, do this or do that, and that could drive 2 hours of engagement for somebody, right? So cool.
Yeah, and that's actually was kind of going to be like one of my questions, but then you just kind of answered it. And the other one was just going to be like, well, what are kind of like your favorite ways to deliver scenarios? And it kind of sounds like you did answer, like, you don't have to, be Bear Grylls out with a professional camera crew for it to be compelling.
Not at all. Not at all. Like, some of if you're, it's got to be like a good book, like, right? Like, what was the last time, like, everybody think back to a time you had like a great book. Did you care that it was on paper and in the same letters? No, the story drove you, right? You were like, some people like, I lost 2 days sleep, I hate you, right? Because they loved it so much, they couldn't put it down. So when you're drafting your scenarios, you really want them to work on paper to be that compelling. You're like, this is a good conundrum. The target audience at least should be feeling that. And then whatever you add, like, it's icing. It's icing, because if that stuff underneath works, words are enough. So.
And so, all right, so let's get into the words. So, okay, so you are writing out your scenario. Do you write it out long form, and do you draw letters, or do you mind map that stuff, or what's like what's your writing process?
Well, my experts write the scenarios for me, right? Because I have a script that I follow to extract stories from them and situations. Then when I've got that conversation transcribed, and I use rev.com, but I just seriously found another place that does it even cheaper. It's called Tami. Anyways.
How do you spell it?
Tami, I think.
Oh, okay.
Anyways, it's 10 cents a minute. I was like, what? Anyways, it's awesome.
Bananas. Yeah.
Because Rev is $1 a minute.
Right.
It's still worth it. Because I've actually talked to people who are like, yeah, let me transcribe that. I'll get back to you in 2 days. I'm like, what? I can have this back tomorrow. I don't even have to think about it. How much is your time worth? Anybody out there who's doing transcription on their own, start hiring it out. It's easier. So I get that transcript back. And then what I do is I pull out the pieces that I think are juicy and would make great scenarios. Because when you're talking to an expert or a practitioner, they'll tell you a whole bunch of stuff. But you got to pull out the stuff that's like, ooh, that sounds compelling. And you're totally guessing, right? I mean, you're not the expert, so you don't know. But you're pulling out the stuff that sounds juicy, sounds compelling, sounds like a tough decision, emotionally charged, all those things. You're like, this is going to make a great scenario. But still hypothesis. pull those out, organize them into basically a beat sheet, which is this happens and this happens and this happens, and because of this happens, this happens. So everything's kind of cause and effect, and it kind of makes that story flow for you. Once you've got that kind of settled, shitty first drafts, nothing's perfect. Then you talk to your practitioner again and say, hey, this situation, why is this one important? And they might say, I don't think that one's a really good one. You should just, and then what's cool is you haven't invested a ton of time in this process. So you're like, that's cool. All right. I didn't spend 4 days crafting this. I spent, an hour and a half pulling out the things I think are important. Let's go through this again, and then solidify the ones that you think are like, yeah, these are difficult. And then what happens is once you've got that kind of beats all of your kind of juicy areas that you're going to tackle, then you definitely need to do, it's not necessarily mind mapping. It kind of looks like, the closest thing I can say is it looks like a decision flow chart, right? Where then you start adding like the decisions. So you've got your major situations, and then you can say if this kind of decision is made, they are not getting it, I'm going to kick them out of this module, or I'm going to let them continue. So you're kind of doing your flow chart as you go through the decisions to make sure that everything works, and you can actually share that with somebody who develops in software, whichever you use, and they understand your flow. Because it's one of the things that's that you have to adjust for is that your storyboard, it's not really a storyboard, it's more like a script, is linear, but the experience is not. Therefore, how do you reconcile the two in a logical way that's really easy for somebody to see the big picture, especially a developer, right? So I find that little decision flowchart that you design, which is still very simple, but it gives them a big picture of you. They're like, oh yeah, when they go into their software, they can just easily map it out and then put in the things that you've drawn out for the text or images. So.
Ooh, that gave me a good idea. We should make like a template or something of decision flowcharts, unless you use like a certain program or.
There's a couple of really good ones. There's one that you can pay for, which I like. It takes a little bit of time to learn, but it's really good. It's called Lucid Chart. Mm-hmm. And then there's another one. I think it's called, what is it called? Ghibli. There's a lot of good flowchart software out there. You can even use Google. Google has the drawing piece. Oh yeah, fabulous. And also it has this other one is called MindMup, MindMup. It's an add-on to Google, which is a way more robust way of doing flowcharts. Most people find it almost too robust. So choose your poison.
Oh, fun. Okay, so we've talked about, just kind of like the nuts and bolts of scenario designs, but can you actually add scenario design to all courses, or do like specific topics and skill sets seek out your skills? Or, so tell us about what are like the best courses that are suited for scenario design?
Well, so that's a great question. You're just full of them today, Robin. So it's funny because a scenario can have multiple purposes, right? But not the same purpose. So let's say you want to teach people a technical skill, right? Like how do you get a customer entered into a database? You can definitely use a scenario, which is, walking somebody, giving them a customer profile, right? And say, this guy needs to do this. How are you going to help them and work through the software? So there's one type of scenario, which is basically very skills based. Then there's other types of scenarios which are like, hey, deal with this customer. What are you going to do? They're angry. And you can have very much a simulation based scenario where you're kind of in the first person and you get to like experience all these customers walking in, or work difficult employees, or you're hiring new people. That's another kind of scenario. Those are called more like sims, I think, in our world. And if you want to get a good example of those, a whole bunch of neat ones, you go to like something like branchtrack.com, and they have all these cool demos of like first person scenario experiences, and those can go pretty deep and branching. So there's that, right? So you can go hardcore skills, soft skills, and then there's the other kind of scenarios, which to me are wholly underused. And so when I, and you probably have experienced this yourself, you go to most established organizations have a ton of learning already. Like most places I talk to, they're like, we got a giant LMS. It's got 600 courses in it, right? And you're like, okay. And they're like, yeah, we gotta make it sexier. And I'm like, okay. Sexier. Okay. But when I think about that, I'm like, okay, so you've got experts around here who are like A players, and they used that unsexy stuff, right? They used it to get to their level. So I'm like, so maybe it's not the stuff. Maybe it's people's perception of, do they even need it? So my idea with the scenarios is that you can actually use it to help people realize that they have gaps, and then drive them to resources that will help them fill that gap. And the analogy I use is, you know how if like, let's say your toilet like acts up and it's breaks inside and you have no idea what to do. And the first thing I do when something like that happens around my house is I'll be like, okay, let's YouTube it.
Yes.
I'll be like, how do you fix that? And then I find the video that has the most views, the most likes, like I'm like good comments where people say, oh yeah, this totally helped me solve my problem. So I watch that video and then I go and I fix my toilet. Nowhere in that exchange do I think this person's mic sucks or this video quality sucks. This is so old looking. No, because the information is relevant, I just want it. I'm like, just give me the info, dude. I don't care, right? So one of the things is that we think is if we make something sexier and cooler at the end, that people are going to naturally be drawn to it. No, they first have to perceive the need. I'm not looking at toilet videos in my free time. I'm only looking at it when I perceive a gap in my own knowledge. So if you can create a scenario where people are put in a whole bunch of situations where there is, they're all of a sudden faced with info or faced with decisions, and they have to make these decisions. They experience what happens and they realize, oh crap, I'm not equipped to deal with this, or I thought I knew how to solve this. Holy moly, I don't. Wait, I wonder if there's something out there. What's your YouTube video? What's your resource that can help me be better? I'm not good at leadership, or I thought I knew how to handle people, or I thought I knew how to, I thought I knew everything about this to be able to actually share it effectively with other people, or all kinds of stuff, right? Should I eat the grub or should I eat the twigs? Which one's got more protein content? I totally thought it was the twigs. Oh, now I'm dead, whatever. So, I should look this up, right? How to cook a grub. So
he does not cook it.
Just eat the raw, right? Probably the best for you. Unadulterated grub. That's great. I bet you it tastes good. So basically what you can do then is once that person gets that aha moment, they're like, oh, I'm not as, I have a gap. They'll go, and if you at that point are able to provide them with the resources they need, they won't care what those resources are, how old they are. For me, it still makes a big deal if the things you're accessing are readable, accessible, in the right tone and all those things. That still adds value, but nothing is going to get them there if they don't perceive the gap. So you can use scenarios to help people experience those gaps, and then have the motivation to go and fill them because they actually now know they need it. Because most people go into our training sessions going, yeah, I already know this. I know this.
Right.
This is going to be another one of those, I know this session, so I might as well turn out because Facebook's on. Is Facebook on yet?
Or that toilet video I've been meaning to watch.
Ooh. Right? So, yeah. So there's
love that idea.
multi-purpose ways, but that's what makes it dangerous too, is because it fits in so many avenues. You're really got to be using it when it augments the experience and actually adds value. So one of the places where I kind of got into a little bit of a boo-boo years back is because somebody actually entered the project with me and said, I want scenarios. And I'm like, great. I love that. I do that. And then they're like, yeah, I want scenarios around this topic. And we did that. And then we tested it we piloted it. And the people who we were piloting it with, they said, oh, that's really cool. But that only happens like once a year, right? And I was like, wait a minute. So we invested all this time, and they were like, this is a great scenario. Like, it's totally true to life, but we don't really do this very often, like at all. And then I could just do the job aid thing and look it up. So the challenge is still to find stuff that adds the most value. And actually, one of the things I like to do with scenarios is say, hey, what's already, like, if somebody's doing, like, what are some things that people are already doing at the company that's really working well? How can I create a scenario to help them do that even better? Like 10x that. That's a cool project, because then you can see wins, and a lot of the problems that companies have, if they just do something they're already doing pretty good and they do it like 10 times better, that adds a ton of value. And then you get to see some serious momentum, because a lot of times what we tackle is stuff that's just like so at the bottom, and
yeah,
they're so incremental, it's hard to prove value. So instead of focusing on those, where do we suck, find out where you're awesome. Let's make that awesomer.
I love that. That's so true. That's such a good perspective, because you're right. We're always talking about the solution, the problem. But like, what if the problem is that, like, what your best just isn't good enough? Like, we can make it even better.
Yeah, exactly. Let's 10x that, baby. Yeah.
Yes. Man, I hope everybody else got like as excited as I did about that idea.
I doubt it, but
like, you dork. Okay. All right. What about okay, so now for those that are listening, they're like, oh yeah, scenario design, that's the way to be. Like, how can they include scenario design like in their own courses? Like, where should they start? Like, they're new at this. Like, what are like your best tips for?
My best tips?
Yeah.
Don't try and invent the wheel by yourself. Go out there and find stuff that is already awesome and working, and just deconstruct it. That's what I do. Just because I know that kind of sounds like weird, but there's lots of great books on this. So if you look at scenario design, there's tons of books that are good, but the only way you're really gonna get good at this, because it's not an intuitive process for a lot of us, because it's not really something we've been exposed to. So I think it's almost like, how to become a great writer. You got to read a lot, right, to see other people's work and then pull from their ideas. So the same thing with scenarios. You want to get started with scenarios, look at stuff out there that is good. Start with Broken Coworker. Look up Haji Kamal. Look at those kinds of examples and say, hey, this is interesting. How could this add value to my project? Are there situations that are costly, or where people mess up a lot and they could benefit from seeing? Like, a lot of times what's great with scenarios is you can compress time in them. So sometimes what happens is we'll make a mistake, but because in the real life, the consequence doesn't like show itself for 2 months, you don't actually make the connection. And then you're like, oh, like years later, like, oh, that's what happened. If I only had been, latching the door, then my place wouldn't have been, burgled or whatever, right? So, but it happens like a year apart, so you don't get it. So with scenarios, you can have somebody do something, and then you just be like 6 months later, somebody dies because you didn't latch it and the thing fell on them. Oh my God, right? So you can actually basically say, is there a decision here that somebody needs to make? And is that decision worth practicing in a safe space? Boom, scenario.
Oh, I love it. And now you host cohorts or programs where you teach scenario design. Is that right?
I do. Right now, what I'm doing is just working with people one-on-one. And then the next cohort, I don't know when it's coming up because, these are quite intensive, but definitely do. Because it's funny because I used to have this belief. I'm like, I could go into every single company and then just do a scenario and that'll just like start this ripple effect. But the challenge is that when I leave, the scenario stuff leaves with me, right? So my goal now is to find people who are interested in getting this, like taking this to the next level, adding this to their toolkit, and then they can just implement this in their workspace. It still takes time, but now you've got the expertise. It's not like just some vendor doing this for you and then going away and taking all of their intellectual capital basically with them. Now you get to hold on to that and then build that movement from within the company, because that's easier than being an outside person coming in.
And so do you think that your practice really has improved your scenario design?
Hell yeah. Oh yeah. That's the only way to get good. I can be an armchair philosopher and quote people and discuss learning theories, but the only way you're going to get good is by having like this crazy bias for action and building stuff and testing it with people who are going to use it. Not just your mom.
That's right.
Yeah. And then, yeah, totally. And also one of the things that I found is huge is when you like in your own head, everything's perfect, right? Because you're filling in gaps all the time. But then when you try and explain it to people, that's when you really start learning things about your processes, because it doesn't always make sense when you say it or trying to get somebody else to do it, right? So that's, to me, mentorship is like the next level of learning. So if you get a chance to, anybody out there, you get a chance to have somebody work with you and teach them stuff, it's going to take you to the next level. Don't shy away from those opportunities. You're always good enough to mentor somebody.
Yeah. And to be mentored.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Always. Like you want to take yourself to the next level. It really is about having somebody else's shortcuts work for you.
Yeah. So what are your best and final tips for those people who want to become instructional designers, and maybe anything else you want to say about scenario design?
I say question everything. Just because somebody has done it or told you or written it in the book, that doesn't mean it's true. I've had to unlearn a lot of things because a lot of the constraints that we have, or a lot of the practices that we have are old and passed on. So you have to start questioning everything and testing it to see if it works for you. And then the other thing I say is have a bias for action. A lot of people talk about stuff, complain about things. The best way to complain is to build something, right? Create something that you're proud of, get it out there, get feedback, and then just continue doing that. That bias for action is what differentiates people who are successful to people who are basically just philosophers in their basement.
That is 100% true. Yeah. Practice, 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 and do, because you're exactly right. None of your goals will be met unless you do something.
Yes. Yeah.
Anna, seriously, I feel like this is like such a huge deal for me. I'm so glad that you came on Become an Idol podcast. Woo! I know everybody's going to be like, what? They're going to be so excited just to hear like you speak directly to new instructional designers and share some of your best tips about scenario design. So thank you so much.
No problem. It was my pleasure. Your energy is awesome and contagious. I loved being here. Woo!
I know. I want to get you back on and do some of that like remote talk that we were talking about like just like working from home and building relationships, because I just need to get another excuse to get you on the phone again.
That's no problem.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, Anna.
Not a problem. Take care, dear.
All right. You too. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. You can find the show notes for this episode at idlecourses.com. If you like this podcast and you want to become an instructional designer and online learning developer, join me in the Idle Courses Academy, where you'll learn to build all the assets you need to land your first job, early access to this podcast tutorials for how to use the eLearning authoring tools, templates for everything course building, and paid instructional design experience opportunities. Now, get out there and build transcendent courses.